I caught my girlfriend cheating with one of my closest buddies, so I turned him over to the cops and cut her completely out of my life. My wife Rachel and I grew up in a fairly big hometown with about 30,000 people, and we had known each other since we were around 6 years old and pretty much spent our entire childhood side by side. When we hit 16 we started dating, and by the time we turned 18 we packed up and moved a few hours away to a larger city for work. By 20 we were married and putting down roots in our very first home, and at 22 she was expecting a baby boy when everything fell apart. Just about 5 weeks before she was supposed to start her maternity leave, a massive shelving unit at her job collapsed on top of her, and the people who came to tell me said she and our baby died instantly. 2 of her co-workers were hurt badly too. One was left paralyzed and the other lost a leg that doctors had to amputate. It turned out the company she worked for had decided to keep using old storage racks that had already been flagged as unsafe, all because it saved them money instead of spending the cash to replace them. I still can't forgive those executives and managers who signed off on that, because their greed stole the love of my life and took away the little boy we never even got to meet. Not long after that the company reached out with what they liked to call a settlement, but to me it felt like blood money. They wanted to wrap things up quietly outside of court to avoid a lawsuit, while all I wanted was real justice. Thankfully the accident made headlines and even caught the attention of a few politicians, so the case went through court faster than anyone expected, and after almost 3 years the final payout for every victim was nearly 10 times what they first offered. The company got hammered with heavy fines for breaking workplace safety rules. A handful of top bosses were fired and some even ended up behind bars. Through all of that I kept my job at a telecommunications firm, and my mom, bless her heart, moved in with me to help me get through the worst of it, and honestly I doubt I would have survived those years without her support. Around then my bosses offered me a promotion that meant I'd be traveling across the state a lot, and I asked if I could set up an office back in my hometown since I wanted to grow the business there and stay close to my roots. They agreed, and after a few months everything finally started to settle down. I wanted a place of my own back in my hometown so I wouldn't have to crash at my parents' place every time I came back, and so I could come and go whenever I felt like it, and that detail matters for what happened next. For years passed, and one Friday I had just returned from a business trip and was catching up on paperwork in my office when Harry, the branch managing director, stepped in. Harry and I had grown up in the same town, though we went to different schools, and since I moved back we had become pretty close friends. He asked how things were going and then out of the blue invited me to a party at his place that evening. It was last minute, but I figured I could use a night out with friends, so I said sure. That's where Harry introduced me to Catherine, a new hire at our hometown branch who was still getting to know everyone and the town itself. From the first conversation it almost felt like I wasn't talking to Catherine at all, but like Rachel was somehow standing there in front of me. As cliché as that sounds, it was like meeting a ghost of the woman I'd lost. I'll skip the drawn-out details, but after 2 years of dating we decided to take things to the next level, and she moved into my house in my hometown. Up to that point everything seemed perfect. Catherine got along great with my parents, and even Rachel's folks welcomed her and said they were relieved someone could bring back the kind of happiness Rachel once gave me. For almost a year life felt steady and good until little signs started to bother me. Our video calls when I was away on trips began to get shorter, and neighbors mentioned seeing a car that sounded exactly like Harry's parked in the alley behind my house whenever I was out of town. Then I noticed clothes in the closet that definitely weren't mine. All the clues pointed toward her cheating, but she kept insisting nothing was wrong. She told me Harry sometimes stopped by to talk about work but never stayed overnight. I tried to brush it off as me being paranoid and kept living like everything was fine, yet deep down something felt off. About 6 months later I learned the hard truth. I had just closed a big deal with a new client and the negotiations wrapped up sooner than planned, so instead of staying out there a few more days I paid for an early flight home, hoping to surprise everyone. A few hours later I was already on the road heading back to my hometown. I pulled into the alley behind my house planning to slip in quietly and surprise Catherine, but deep down I also wanted to see if that mysterious car was really there, and sure enough a car sat there blocking the back entrance. At first I froze, thinking maybe some careless neighbor had parked there by accident, but then I realized it was Harry's car without a doubt. I parked behind him, got out, and thought how strange it was for him to be here so late, since she'd always claimed he never stayed long. As I walked toward the back of the house I saw something that made my heart drop into my shoes. I stopped dead in my tracks like time itself had come to a halt. There in the kitchen my supposed best friend was in the middle of getting intimate with my girlfriend right on my own countertop. 1,000 questions raced through my head all at once. Was this real or was I dreaming, and why would they do this in my own home of all places? Feeling crushed, I turned and walked away without letting them see me. I climbed back into my car and sat there, what felt like forever, tears running down my face, until sadness slowly hardened into the same kind of rage I once felt toward the people responsible for Rachel's death. I wanted to hurt them the way they had just hurt me. But I've never believed in violence, so instead I decided I'd wreck their lives in a different way. I backed the car a little down the alley, far enough to still keep Harry's car in sight, then eased back toward the gate where I could clearly see the house, and I called her. They were still at it when her phone started ringing. Both of them looked at the screen, then at each other when they saw my name, and I could tell she was hesitating whether to pick up. She didn't answer, so a moment later I called again. This time she picked up, and the second she said hello I hung up and headed back toward my car. Not long after she called me back asking why I was ringing so late. I told her I'd be home in about 10 minutes and didn't want to startle her by showing up unannounced. She was clearly stunned but tried to sound happy that I was coming back. The call ended quickly after she said she was going to change clothes, and I wished her a good night before hanging up. Seconds later Harry bolted out the gate, still half-dressed, dove into his car and tore off like someone was chasing him. I couldn't help but grin, knowing how terrified they must have felt at the thought of getting caught. I waited a little while before finally parking my car in the exact spot Harry's had been just minutes earlier. The rest of the night passed pretty quietly, and only after she finally fell asleep did I get up and head to my little office at the end of the hall. I couldn't sleep, I needed a plan, and I started to put one together right away. My mom always taught me to be a pacifist and let karma do its work, but this time I decided karma could use a little help from me. I resolved to punish them separately but ruin both their lives in the end. I already knew Harry dabbled in drugs, not hardcore stuff but enough, and he kept it secret. I'd seen a little powder and some plants at his place once and pretended not to notice when he tried to hide things. When he slipped up I started making calls to suppliers who dealt in shady transactions and placed a few careful orders so that in a few weeks I'd have what I needed to make my plan work. About a month later I threw a barbecue for friends including Harry. After I made sure he'd had enough to drink I suggested he crash at my place and sleep it off. Early the next morning while he was out cold I took some of the powder plus a few personal items of mine and scattered them around his car. I hid the largest stash in the spare tire, well thinking he wouldn't find it for months while my plan unfolded. I also slipped a little powder and a couple of things into his house when I dropped him off because he was too wasted to drive himself. A few days after that I staged a break-in at my own kitchen. I smashed the back glass on the door and left the door open before I flew out of town for a business trip. When I landed there were a few messages waiting for me, one from my clearly terrified mom saying she'd found the broken door and called the police, one from Catherine in tears, and one from the local PD asking me to call them back. I told the cops I was on a work trip and would be back next week to speak with them. While I was away I asked Catherine to stay with my parents until I returned, and I had my dad arrange for a local security company to install cameras and an alarm so there would be official records of what happened. When I came back I put on the whole act of shock and disbelief like anyone else. I said I couldn't believe it and who would do such a thing, and after they did a careful sweep of the house and found signs of forced entry everyone was convinced that I was the victim. My plan was in motion and everything looked like it was playing out exactly as I'd intended. They took some of my things, so I filed a police report and invited the rep from the security company over to walk Olivia and me through how the cameras and alarm system worked. The rep looked a little awkward when I asked the question I'd been waiting for about what to do if we wanted privacy during certain activities and didn't want them recorded. I already knew why Olivia was uneasy about that, so the rep wasn't surprised and showed us on his laptop how to disable recording for specific cameras to preserve privacy. While he was heading for the door I asked if it was possible to get an alert when any camera was turned off just for my peace of mind. He came back and helped me set up an email notification so I'd get a message if any feed went dark. Once he left all I had to do was wait. At that point I went to see a family law attorney to make sure the plan I was about to put in motion wouldn't backfire legally. I needed to know I wouldn't be forced to pay Olivia or give her a share of the house if things went south. Being Emily's only heir I didn't want any nasty surprises where Olivia could claim part of the property. Thankfully my lawyer put me at ease and explained that even though we'd dated for almost 4 years and she'd lived with me, it wasn't long enough to qualify us as common-law spouses in our state. Since I paid all the bills and Olivia never contributed to rent, she didn't have a legal basis to demand money from me. Still, to be safe, he drew up what felt like an ironclad document just in case any legal issues popped up later. The following week my employer offered me a promotion that would move me back to the city to lead the team I'd been working with. That meant less travel and being based in one place. The relocation would take about 6 weeks, which was perfect timing to collect and organize all the evidence I needed. When I returned to my hometown, I started putting the final pieces of my plan in place. I asked Michael to approve a week off for Olivia, and 2 weeks later I told him I wanted to send her and a couple of friends on a short getaway so they could have fun while I tied up a few loose ends before I took the biggest step of my life a second time. Matt jumped up and gave me a tight hug, congratulating me on being ready to do it again. I hugged him back, but not the way he probably imagined in that moment. He agreed and booked the week I asked for, and I made him promise not to tell anyone because I wanted it to be a massive surprise. I knew how fast gossip spread around the office, and that was part of the plan. That same evening I told Emma that I had reserved a fully paid week at a fancy spa retreat for her and 2 friends. I told her to pick whoever she wanted and that everything was taken care of with no questions asked. She screamed with joy like a kid told the whole candy store was hers. I also told her I would be in town the next week preparing for a big client meeting, and then I would fly out and not return until the Monday she was supposed to leave. She sounded a little bummed, but I promised the surprise would make it worth it when she got back. What I didn't tell her was that I planned to take 2 full weeks off clear across the country to mentally prepare for the storm I intended to unleash once she boarded that plane, and to savor the first phase of the freedom I was about to give myself on a Sunday. 2 weeks later I came back and drove past the house. Of course Jack's car was parked there just like that first night when I caught them. I parked a little further down so the cameras would catch everything and watched the feeds. They were asleep in my bed, so there was no surprise that night, even though I had recorded their intimate moments over the 2 weeks I was away. I made the first call to the police pretending to be a worried neighbor and told them someone was loitering in a car in the alley behind my house and seemed to be passing things through the windows to people in passing cars. I said I was afraid he might be selling drugs or planning a burglary. I gave them the car number and a description, and they said an officer would be there in a few minutes. After that I rang Emma and told her I'd be home in 10 minutes, and although I knew she was leaving the next day, I really wanted to surprise her. I couldn't wait to see the look on her face when she thought she was getting the happiest surprise of her life. Watching the footage again, I can't help but laugh at the commotion and wonder how I didn't hear any of it from the street. A few seconds later Jason, half naked, comes flying out the back door and bolts to his car. I couldn't have scripted a better turn of events. When Jason peels away at top speed, a police cruiser turns onto the street beside me and takes off after him. I pull my car up and go inside like nothing's wrong. Sarah greets me excited and we do the usual couple things. She falls asleep and of course I can't. The whole night I lie awake thinking about what comes next. The next day a cab picks up Sarah and her friends. Once they're gone I wait a few hours and then start putting the plan in motion. I call my buddy Mike, who does hauling, and ask him to help me move some boxes on Friday. I tell him we'll need to drop a few at a storage unit and he's fine with it. That afternoon I start packing Sarah's things, and later the cops ring me asking me to identify items they seized from a suspect the night before that matched the stolen property I reported. I smile because my setup with Jason is working and tell them I'll come by to pick up the stuff soon. When I get there some items are still missing. They're probably at Jason's place and the police haven't searched it yet. By now the whole town is talking because rumors don't stay quiet in a small place like ours. Jason is publicly shamed and immediately fired for possession of drugs and stolen goods. The company bosses come to me that evening to offer official apologies on behalf of the firm. That night I go to my parents' house and tell them and Emily's parents what happened. I leave out some of the darker details and frame it as me moving back to the city after the promotion, but without the cheater Sarah. They're upset I didn't tell them sooner, yet they're relieved and quietly proud that I handled it without stooping to their level. Even though my parents gave their blessing to my plan to disappear from Sarah's life completely, we all shared a few drinks, a lot of laughter and a few tears before I finally headed home that Friday afternoon after a long exhausting week of setting up cleaners for the following week, prepping the house to be rented out and juggling a pile of tasks back at my hometown office. I loaded a few last boxes into my car and swung by my folks' place to say goodbye one more time. Before leaving town I stopped to see Becky, one of Emily's childhood friends and the only person besides me who knew the full picture minus the details about Jason. Without her help I never could have pulled everything together so quickly. I handed Becky a thick envelope stuffed with proof of Sarah's affair along with a letter and several legal documents from my attorney spelling out that Sarah was forbidden to contact me and explaining exactly how she could reclaim her belongings now stored in a rental unit we'd set up. After a quick hug and a quiet thank you I hit the road and drove back toward the city. On Sunday morning I woke to a phone that looked like it was about to explode with missed calls, voicemails and angry texts. Turns out Sarah had come home early because someone tipped her off that something big was happening. She walked in to find the house empty with a for rent sign planted in the yard. Panic sent her straight to my parents' door, but they closed it without a word, and that sent her calling everyone she could until she finally reached Becky, who told her about the package waiting for her. From what I heard, Sarah didn't take that news well, not that I expected her to, judging by the long string of furious messages accusing me of setting Jason up for trouble. I half expected her to show up at my door, but she never did. Now to clear up the biggest questions people keep asking me: first, what happened to Jason, why I went so hard on him, and why I'm willing to share this whole saga online knowing it could point back to me. Jason is facing a few months in jail since it's his first offense, but he might be out sooner, and I honestly think that's the least he deserves. I left out a few key details that would give away exactly who I am, and I even tweaked the descriptions of places so it would feel like this could have happened anywhere in the world. There was already plenty of evidence sitting in Jason's house. I simply gave the police the nudge they needed to dig deeper into what he was really doing. Even though my folks gave their blessing to my plan to vanish Kate from my life, we shared a few drinks and a lot of laughs and tears before I finally left town that Friday afternoon. I'd spent the week lining up cleaners for the next week, getting the house ready to rent, and tying up 100 little tasks at the hometown office. I loaded a few boxes into the car and stopped by my parents to say goodbye before heading out. Before I drove away I swung by to see Laura. She was one of Megan's closest childhood friends and the only person besides me who knew the full story apart from the Mark details. Without Laura I couldn't have pulled everything together so fast. I handed her a thick envelope stuffed with the proof of Kate's cheating, a letter, and a set of legal papers from my lawyer that said Kate must not contact me, and explained how she could collect her things from the storage unit I'd rented. After a quick hug and a quiet thank you I drove back to the city, and on Sunday morning I woke to my phone buzzing with missed calls, voicemails, and angry texts. It turned out Kate had come home early because she'd heard something was happening in town, and she walked in to find the house empty with a for rent sign planted on the lawn. Panicked, she went straight to my parents' house where they closed the door on her. That pushed her to call everyone she could until she somehow reached Laura, who told her about the package waiting for her. I heard she didn't take the news well, which I didn't exactly blame her for given everything that happened and the long string of furious messages accusing me of framing Mark. I was half expecting her to show up at my door, but she never did. Now I'll answer the most asked questions about this whole thing, starting with what happened to Mark and why I came down so hard on him and why I'd put myself at risk by sharing this story online. Mark is facing a few months inside since it's his first offense. He might get out sooner, and I believe that's fair given what he'd done. I left out a few specific details that could have identified me exactly, and I changed some place descriptions to make this feel like it could have happened anywhere. There was already plenty of evidence in Mark's house, and all I did was give the police the reason they needed to look deeper into what he'd been up to.